Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, I want to talk to you about all our American gods. And so today's stream is going to be getting into what I'm calling the gods of contemporary America. And so we're going to be looking at a whole host of things, topics that have been brought up in previous streams, such as secularism, consumerism, individualism, progress, scientism, big pharma, sports, Hollywood, transnational corporations, and the list goes on. So we're going to be diving into all these different things today and looking at essentially how, or what I'm calling the American pantheon. Right, the American pantheon, the spiritual landscape of contemporary America. I'm arguing, and I'm sure most of you guys would agree, that it certainly isn't a Christian landscape any longer. And so I want to talk about really what are the ultimate forms of authority within the American mind. I could get into like sexual degeneracy and stuff like that. I'm really not going to make that a central focus for today's conversation because that doesn't feel uniquely American. And so my goal was to find things that are really specific to the American context. Sex, degeneracy, that's kind of rampant throughout most of the world right now to a degree, to one degree or another. So not really focused on that, although obviously that would be considered a sort of God within the American context, sexual degeneracy, sex itself, within advertisers, sex sells. So we're going to be getting into a whole host of things. I think today's stream is going to be pretty exciting. Really what spawned the topic for today's stream came from a song that I heard. So some of you who follow me over on Instagram, and I will share that link right here, saw a story that I created and shared a few days ago on the All Our American Gods. This was the name of the song. And in that song, I listened to it, I heard it, and I thought, wow, this is great. It talks about, empires fall when we remove the unmovable, talking about God, and that all my intelligent friends basically think that it's a good thing we leave all these things behind, talking about Christianity, talking about God. And so I heard these lyrics in the song. I thought, wow, that was really cool. It turned out it was actually a pretty decent song. And so I hopped on Final Cut Pro and just threw together basically a video for my Instagram stories. And if you want to see that, you can go to my Instagram. It's actually just go to my page. It's one of the featured stories that you can do there. If you want to check out the video, I can't play it right now, or I would, but because of YouTube and the copyright and music, I can't play the video for you guys, or I would. But if you want to see it, which I'm going to be sharing, what I'm going to start this stream off is actually share some of the images I used to create my video. If you want to see that, go over to my Instagram that I put in the chat there. Handle is @DPHARRY, @DPHARRY, and you can see that featured story there on my page. Also, housekeeping, of course. Apologize if you find this annoying, but I do want to thank, we've had a few new website subscribers that just joined in the last few days. Thank you very much, guys. I just got 3 new workout videos up yesterday. Tonight or tomorrow, actually probably tomorrow, I will have another video for members, an educational video. It won't be a fitness video. We're actually going to be talking about sort of important secular terms regarding the study of religion. And I even wanted to read a few things regarding secular symbolism of the lion. So both of those, I wanted to create some members-only videos, so you can expect those up in the next few days, but there's already tons of content up there if you would like to watch that. But even if you just want to donate, becoming a website member, just consider that $5 a month a donation, and I would greatly appreciate it if you're able to do that, of course. And then if you have time, you can always go to the libraries there and check out all the video content. So thank you guys for everyone who signed up. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Now, for today's video, Also, I do want to say I'm doing one-on-one sessions. If anybody's interested, we could do one-on-one sessions on theology, philosophy, world religions, cultural commentary, anything like that. But okay, I digress. So today's video, I titled All Our American Gods based on this song that I heard. And you guys can hear this song, if you'd like, on my Instagram page at DPHarry. And it got me thinking, then what are all the American gods of the contemporary American pantheon? Right? And so I had never heard anybody really frame it this way, but the American pantheon, the gods, the polytheistic pantheon of the secular American. What are they? What exactly do they give ultimate authority to? And so I highlighted a few here that I want to go one by one and talk about in today's stream. Obviously, some of these topics I've discussed at length in other streams, so we're going to be putting some ideas together in a new context. But the first one is individualism, of course, right? Within the American context, we're going to be getting into individualism, and we'll be discussing what is individualism and in regards to how it is the basic unit in which one begins to build a worldview or a paradigm, and how individualism is actually the fundamental unit of things like anarchism, liberalism, libertarianism, existentialism. So I want to talk then, as I move through these different, what I'm calling gods of the American pantheon or the American mind, how they actually relate to an Orthodox Christian theology. And so I want to talk then, when we get into individualism, how individualism is sort of an inversion of the Christian theology of person and personhood. And so we get into these atomized understandings of the individual, or every individual is the same as every other individual. We're going to connect this back to the Industrial Revolution, even things like the printing press. You may not be ready for that critique, but we're going to be talking about the printing press, a gentleman named Marshall Mcluhan, some of you may be familiar with. But we're going to be talking about how individualism is a sort of bastardization or an inversion of ultimate Christian theology, even how Christ is both individual and then salvific for the collective, how we are, the narrative of Christ going out and saving the one lost sheep and leaving the 99 insinuates a sort of value of the person, or in this context, the individual. But we're going to talk about how our theology and American individualism are actually in total opposite directions. And then we're going to be getting into consumerism. Consumerism is obviously going to be another unique dimension to the American pantheon, to the American mind, to ultimate authoritative structures. Really, and this has influenced much of the world, unfortunately, but you've heard me talking about the spiritual but not religious, perennialism and this type of stuff, and how spiritual but not religious is a sort of remnant. It is a product of consumerism, in which Western people begin to consume spirituality and religion in a capitalistic free market way, right? You just go to these different things and you choose what you want and you put them on. You put on your Buddhist prayer beads, you do this, you do that, and you consume an image, and you're really consuming your religion, you're consuming your spirituality. And so one of the things when we get to consumerism, what I want to talk about is how ultimate structures of identity within the American landscape are actually consumed. That much of what we do, again, as a new deity, as a new God within the American mind, is that we actually consume our identities. And so I want to talk about that. Then, of course, the next one is money and capitalism. And I want to talk about Mammon and how Mammon is the ultimate God to so many in this country, and how Mammon and its pernicious activities such as usury have become fixtures within the identity of America itself. And this leads to the TP-USA dichotomies between capitalism and socialism and all. And so I want to talk about that as well, how money and capitalism, Mammon, is another deity of the American pantheon. The next one, of course, is secularism. Secularism is another god, somehow that this value, this separation of church and state, is of ultimate authority. And those of you who are a little bit more sophisticated in various religious worldviews who might be familiar that the Church of Satan is one of the biggest advocates of secularism. And so we can talk about how secularism is ultimately a sort of degenerate, you could say a sort of satanic worldview in which religion becomes subservient to secularism itself, where secularism becomes the dominant paradigm, and religion can never triumph. That it's an and which leads to all religions being equal, because all religions are equal within a secular context. So that's going to be another god. Another god is progress, the concept of progress itself. This is a god within the American pantheon. And so we're going to be getting into progressivism as a political philosophy and how its focus on the environment, social justice, workers' compensation, rights. But where are the rights that the progressives argue for? Where do they come from? Do they come from God? No, of course not. They come from the state. And so we're going to be getting into how progress is really regress from God. And this is a fixture within the American mind. And we can see this splitting the country right now regarding Trump and all this stuff. And I'll get more into this, but Trump represents sort of the tradition. And the left, obviously, is the regress. And that that regress is really about the state filling the role or the vacancy that God leaves when we remove the unmovable, right? When we remove the unmovable, which goes back to the beginning of the song that gave me the whole idea for this stream in the first place. Then we're going to get into Scientism. We're going to get into the cult of the white lab coat, how this connects to Dr. Fauci, what we're witnessing in the COVID era and stuff like this. So Scientism, I think, is another god within the American mind. Again, much of this people are not totally conscientious of in themselves. So it's not like they're thinking about these ideas. This is my sort of paradigmatic critique of, again, the American pantheon. But Scientism, because of what I talked about, and again, this was a phrase, I'm not creating this phrase, it's something that Terence McKenna used to say, is that there has been a balkanization of epistemology, which I agree with, right? Epistemology, knowledge, how do you come to know something? How do you know what's true? That do you live your life based on a religious epistemology, a scientific epistemology, a political epistemology, a sociological epistemology? Like, we're now in the 20th century and then now in the 21st century, how do you orient yourself? I mean, quantum physics seems to undercut the epistemological foundation of science itself. So people are kind of less grasping for straws in regards to how do we come to know the world. And because of that, I think what emerges, or what has emerged, is Scientism, and that is a sort of religious spiritual belief in the validity of science itself without any understanding of it or ability to critique it. And so I'll dive deeper into that one as well. And then I have a few more gods within the pantheon. The other one is sports and Hollywood. And so we're going to be getting into entertainment and how these forms of entertainment are really just the purpose is to cast a larger web, to create feedback loops that get people back to worshiping the deities that we've mentioned previously. And so we'll be talking about sports and Hollywood. Then we'll be getting into the military-industrial complex. Is that a god in the American pantheon? Well, we'll discuss. Obviously, war isn't the most popular thing with quote-unquote Americans, but we see with the neocon establishment, with our the politicians we have running this country, that war seems to be perpetual, and war seems to be the end, and war is never going to be an end in the war, because as I am going to hypothesize, that war itself in the military-industrial complex, the U.S. being the sort of military wing of the globalist power structure, that they need ways to constantly create more revenue through the war, and they need more blood sacrifices. Because ultimately, if what Dyer's talking about, and so many people in sort of Christian circles talking about the contemporary scene, if Satan is ultimately at the top of that hierarchy, well, there needs to be movement always towards death and always towards the destruction of individual souls. And I think that's partly what the military-industrial complex is about. It's about literal sacrifice, literal blood sacrifice, the further development and advancement of man as God through technology, and then the worship of money over human life. So we'll be getting into that. And then the last one's more of a question, are the founding fathers in the Constitution a deity in and of themselves within this American pantheon? So that will be the last one we'll get to. I'll say how it is and isn't, and then leave you guys to debate among yourselves whether you feel it is. But before I get through all these different topics, because I do have bullet points for each one that I want to sort of enumerate and go through, I want to highlight a few different things. And so the first one that I want to highlight is the reason why I think the video that I made, again, you can see that over on my Instagram. I'm posting that now. You can go over to the Instagram and check that out. Also, if you guys would like to become website members, here is that link. But for this quote-unquote American pantheon, as I'm talking about, all our American gods, right? The title of our stream today, the basis for that, and one of the reasons why I think it's so apropos, is because America is not a Christian nation anymore. We can talk about the sort of cultural hegemony of Christianity back through the 18th century, through the 19th century, even through the majority of the 20th century. But to talk about America as a Christian nation in the 21st century, I don't think it's really accurate. And one of the ways in which we can look and analyze the accuracy of what is the religious or spiritual identity of America is what is the single largest religious demographic. And you guys have heard me talk about in previous streams and previous conversations that in 2017, based on the Pew Research analysis, that the spiritual but not religious, or the none category, none of the above, includes atheists, agnostics, and then the spiritual but not religious, is now the single largest religious category in America. And this was the first. It was usually, historically speaking, it was always Protestantism, then Catholicism. Those are different in the survey, so those are separated, but usually it's Protestantism, then Catholicism, and then maybe other forms of Christianity, and then you'd get into all the other stuff. But within the with the ripple effects of the post-1960s counterculture, what we see is that tear, and what I've called before, based on Peter Berger's American sociologist, his theory of the sacred canopy, that there has to be a canopy that unites people within a nation, within a tribe, within a country, all this different stuff. And how the 1960s counterculture, the Cultural Revolution, really tears that fabric, that canopy that united all of us. And so much of the stuff that I'm going to be highlighting now, like the secularism, like the Constitution, like consumerism or capitalism or progress or even individualism, so much of these ideas are rooted really with post-Enlightenment thought. And America itself is a product of the Enlightenment. And so it was, as a country, we got away with so much when there was basically a one single identity that connected all of us, and that was Christianity. So yes, we had a few atheists. Yes, you'll find the very infrequent Jew and Muslim throughout early American history, but by and large, and this would be true for any scholar talking about this, that America was inhabited by Christians, different types of Christians fleeing persecution from England, all this different stuff. But within that, despite the multiplicity of their theologies, which is a problem with Protestantism itself, right? That's a critique all in of itself. That'd be a whole stream. But because we have all these different types of Christians, they at least are using the same book, and they have basically, generally speaking, the same ethics, the same morality, the same epistemology, right? And so if we're going to think of America and American identity, historically speaking, as like a set of Russian dolls, Christianity, whether Protestant or Catholic, unified all the immigrants that came through the 18th century and even the centuries after that, the 19th and the 20th century. I mean, when we look at all our ancestors coming to Ellis Island, they were by and large majority Christian. And yes, they spoke different language. Yes, they were of different ethnicities, but there was something that connected all of them. And so when we talked about the melting pot coming into this country and melting into it, adopting its values, that is really adopting a sort of Christian paradigm. Now, again, I'm saying that paradigm has dissolved post-1960s in America. Now that paradigm really doesn't exist outside of what we would call Trump supporters, the conservative right, or the right wing, whatever. So that idea of Christianity unifying all of us and really covering up many of the flaws of post-Enlightenment thought, a lot of that stuff wasn't obvious until we got to the later half of the 20th century and the 21st century, where it's apparent that we don't have much of anything that unifies us across this country. Half the country despises what the American history is and what America traditionally represents. And then you have the other half that potentially over idolizes aspects of American history. So, it's just, it's something that I think is interesting, that plays into the idea of a new spiritual identity, a new religious identity of America. And that's why we're talking about all our American gods, the American pantheon, that this breakdown in Christianity, this schism, this fracturing, this tear in our cultural canopy leads to a place in which now a new set of ultimate values emerge. And these ultimate values are really globalism. As we talked about with my previous stream on virtue signaling. Virtue signaling was just ultimately, to condense that entire video down, it was really talking about how virtue signaling is a way in which people can socially identify themselves as subservient to a globalist agenda. And I would say what we've seen is the pernicious effects of globalism itself and multiculturalism and all this stuff working in the name of America or the American experiment or the American enterprise has eroded Christ and God and tradition and foundation to all this stuff. And people's ultimate authorities are the globalist structures. It's the corporations. It's the way they feel. It's their individualism. It's their hedonism. It's the commercials. It's the Hollywood celebrities. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, and I will mention later, is the connection between the linguistic phrasing of Hollywood stars and then the stars going out and promoting much of the propaganda on our country and really global propaganda, and how that's tied to a sort of terrestrial form of astrology, right? That astrology itself, condemned in the Bible within our paradigm, is about really predicting the future, orienting oneself through time, right? And we see how the stars, with the light pollution, if you will, right? We've actually been cut off from the actual stars through the light pollution, and the light pollution brings us down to this really enclosed terrestrial level. And the new stars are literally celebrities who have been okayed and sexually abused to a point where they are slaves in and of themselves. And so it's really then the population becoming slaves to people and idolizing people who are already slaves then to a system. So I think that's interesting. So I've talked about the 60s cultural revolution fracturing the canopy. And yeah, so this was the opening part that I want to talk about is America has a new spiritual and religious identity. America is not, quote unquote, a Christian nation. And I would say that, and I know some people are saying, no, you shouldn't say that. The vast majority are, if you include both Protestant and Catholicism, so it's the largest single religion in America. But then we have to go, dive a little deeper in our analysis and say, well, let's look at a lot of those Protestants and those Catholics. How many support homosexuality, right? If you're a Protestant and you have a female pastor or you support homosexuality, you've already undercut the epistemological foundation of your tradition, right? Protestants, as you guys know, most of you guys are Orthodox, so I'm speaking to the choir here, but their epistemology is that the Bible is the Word of God. If the Bible is the Word of God, and the Word of God clearly says women shouldn't lead congregations, they shouldn't lead men, and that homosexuality is a sin, how do you justify doing exactly that? Well, clearly you've undercut the epistemological foundation of your tradition. Now you exist within a world of relativism, and that's exactly what they support. It's subjectivism, it's relativism, it's postmodern understandings of identity, of America, of the patriarchy, of all this different stuff. So what exactly is Christian about America in 2020? Right, that's a question for those of you who may be in opposition to what I'm saying, that we are really post a Christian, Christian America is really a past phenomenon, that the growth in the New Age and the spiritual, not religious, atheism pretty much stays at 3%, maybe growth in agnosticism, if you will, has led us to a point where what exactly is Christian about America? And then what is even Christian about some of American Christians? because they promote such liberalized, progressive, degenerate worldviews, how is that even Christian? You know, we can't consider the Protestants, who again undercut their own epistemology, Christians. I mean, we can. How are you demarcating? Do they believe in Christ? Okay, maybe that's your justification. My rubric is how well are they holding up to sort of scriptural ideals, Christian ideals, this types of thing. So if you're promoting those ideas, you're not even promoting Christianity. You're not even promoting what, again, your epistemology says has to be true. So what is Christian about America? And I'd say not much. Not much. There's quite a bit of Christian about Americans. There's a section of Americans that are very Christian, that uphold Christian values, that support traditional Christianity. And I think a lot of them are becoming younger and younger. I think one of the things that you and I and all these people, you know, anybody watching this stream now live or recorded, we, as I've talked about before, are the future. We are, you know, who's going to take power in the next 20 years or so. So we are going to change the tide of culture, and how the boomers really were so subjected to propaganda with the televisions, with the radios and all this stuff. And, you know, and we can blame them, but we also can't blame them. I mean, they were experimented upon by intelligence agencies, you know, by all this stuff. So it's interesting that it's the younger guys, again, most of us and women watching this stream and part of the trad-cath movement or the ortho movement, we are going to be us. And then even the fundamental Protestants out there, evangelicals, we're going to be the heart of what we're calling traditional Christianity in America. So we are it. And more people are going to, you know, as you know, yourselves, our friends, more and more people are moving through life and rediscovering the validity of traditional values, Christianity itself as a religion, as the ultimate religion. So very interesting stuff going on culturally speaking. But anyways, before I get too far astray, I do want to go through some of the images that I wanted to share with you guys that are in that video. Again, that video that's on my Instagram. If you go to my Instagram page at DPHARRY, you'll see it's a featured story there. It's a video that I've made. But the first one is this image. And so when you watch that video, the first image you're going to see is this one right here. It's this black cross, and it looks like the battery's dying. It says the end of Christianity. Now, do I think Christianity is coming to an end? No, I do not. Of course not. That's not why I use this image in that video. It's that I do think Christianity and its power within this country, in regards to America, the United States, that is certainly at odds with what we see. And so the end of Christianity as the ultimate identity of America, yes, I think that has ended. But I also, as I've said, I'm very optimistic about what we're doing with orthodoxy. I feel like there's a lot of life coming from the Gen Z and the millennials in regards to rediscovering orthodoxy, often traditional Catholicism, and then you just have to wait a few months till Frank does something else, and then eventually they get over to looking at orthodoxy. But this was the first image that I shared, and then the second one led into this one right here, which is Baphomet. And so the end of Christianity leads to what, ultimately? The point of me using this was it ultimately leads to evil. It leads to Satan. It leads to the devil himself. And so what we see here is Baphomet imposed upon the human brain, which is then tied to a motherboard, highlighting the technocracy, the Neuralink phenomenon, the integration of man and machine, transhumanism. Transhumanism itself, as I've argued before, is ultimately demonic, because not that it may help somebody in a positive way. The reason why it's ultimately demonic is what's driving it is the intention to conquer death, man becoming God, man mixing with machine, and all this different stuff. And I have images right here, again, in this whole host of images that I want to share with you guys that are going to articulate exactly that the transhumanist movement is about, instead of man being made in the image of God, we are making machines in the image of us, and claiming that somehow the things that we're making images of in the image of us are superior to us, right? It's a total conundrum there. So unlike our theology, and that's another thing I'm going to be highlighting throughout today's video, is how a lot of this stuff is just like inversions of what we actually believe. But I actually lost my thread there. I have no idea what I was talking about. Sorry about that. We're talking about the transhumanism and the blending of machine. And so the contradiction, then, it's so interesting how our theology talks about us being made in the image of God. Of course, if we're made in the image of God, God must be superior to that image. Yet within the transhumanist paradigm, somehow machine being made in the image of man leads machine being superior to man, which really, again, ties to the theology that all this stuff is about the enslavement of humanity, that this is a spiritual war, this is about your soul, this is about death. And so one of the things that I, again, want to highlight as we move through today is how much of this stuff always leads to death in one way or another. It doesn't lead to life, and it doesn't ultimately lead back to God, obviously. So that was the second image I used in my video, and then fading from that one, it moves right into this one, a Baphomet figure, right? So we see Baphomet, right, which is a sort of esoteric depiction of Satan, if you will. We see androgyny. We see a hermaphrodite. Baphomet has female breasts. It has a male goat head on it, and it has like what appears to be like male arms, muscular arms with goat legs. And so we see Satan depicted in a sort of hermaphroditic state with horns. And so interestingly, then, when we see what do they call it, drag queen story hour, that's exactly what we see. We almost see the embodiment of Baphomet there. So again, prominent within America, prominent within the Western world right now. Moving from those images, I moved to this image that I think is very powerful, and I'll enlarge it here for you if you can't see it. And it says, their sons and their daughters they sacrifice to the idols of Canaan. And what it shows is a sort of ancient Canaanite altar with what appeared to be like a priest offering a child, and then below on the bottom of the steps what appears to be a modern woman holding her child. And as you guys, I'm sure, agree, we can't help but notice that abortion is a sort of ritualistic offering that has been occurring on this planet for a while. The sacrifice of children, the sacrifice of the most innocent, the sacrifice of the most pure. Where do we hear this stuff? Surely not reminiscent of Christ, but that's exactly why the pagan idols liked children. Sacrificing your child. You're sacrificing the innocent, you're sacrificing the pure, you're sacrificing the helpless. And this is exactly what's going on in America right now. And so from this image, I moved to this one right here, which then kind of highlights exactly what I'm talking about with Planned Parenthood. Again, an altar to an ancient Canaanite deity. And that is what people are doing with their babies. No woman goes and gets an abortion and feels better about themselves afterwards. And so what are we doing as a country? What are we doing as a people when we can't even see the sacredness in our own children? We can't even witness the sacredness in life itself. So we sacrifice it. And then in the name of sacrificing our children, they tell us that we can't eat meat and we have to eat vegetarian because they care about life and souls and all this stuff. I mean, the schism in these people's minds is incredible, but it's reminiscent, and it's able to exist in a society without God. And that's exactly what we live in now. There's very, very, very little about this country that we could consider Christian. I mean, one of the things that I think is so interesting is you can hardly even say Christmas anymore. People don't want to say Christmas. I notice that I tell people Merry Christmas and they look at me and then they respond very specifically by saying Happy Holidays. That Christ is taken out of just about everything. Anyways, moving on. The next one is Hollywood. We don't have to spend much time on this one. It's just that Hollywood, I think, is the ultimate source for many, many people. And as I said, I find it interesting that linguistically, when we talk about stars, following the stars, you're a star, I can't help but notice an association between astrology, which, again, the stereotype of contemporary white women and astrology, it's so true. It's so true. It's like every time I interact with one and then I find out, okay, they're not Christian, they do believe in astrology. Very interesting, I think. But we moved our focus on the astrological, not that we should, right? The astrological emphasis of the stars and the movements of the stars to a sort of venerative focus on people and stars of Hollywood. And again, what is Hollywood? Hollywood is where magic is done. Hollywood, wood coming from a holly tree, is the most efficacious magical wand. I've talked about this before. Look at Harry Potter. Harry Potter has a special magic wand that's made from a special type of wood. It comes from the holly tree. And so Hollywood is still performing magic. And they're doing it through a multitude of ways. And I'll get into that when we talk about sports and Hollywood and how, again, it's really Hollywood in their magic. Their magic is getting people to then go back and re-venerate all these American gods. And I'll talk about that here in a few. Then the next one that I had was moving into this whole transhumanism stuff. So this is a popular book by Jacob Schatzer. And it's talking about how transhumanism and the image of God. The image of God. Oh, very interesting. And so we see God's hand moving towards the power button, reference back to Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel. And so I just use a more direct reference after that of literally a robot in somebody's hand taking a photo and trying to reenact God's creation of Adam by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. So in America, again, all progress is regress. All movement is away from God and towards the world. And so again, we see this with transhumanism. We see this with they think they're being cute. They think they're being clever about the sort of references to Adam and God with man and machine. But it's not, just highlights the sterility of it all, right? Again, it highlights how it's always leading towards death. Because are those machines alive? Are those machines alive? And do they venerate those machines? Absolutely. And so then they have to come up with new definitions of what is living, like algorithmic sort of sets of awareness. So getting into, again, larger theories, tying it into materialism and reductionism, or ideas of consciousness or stuff like that. So we just see, again, more degeneracy, more referencing towards the ultimate gods of the American pantheon, one of which is progress, one of which is scientism. Both of those culminate in transhumanism. So another image of the gods of the American pantheon is certainly the worship of oneself. And that's what we're seeing with the seductive and pernicious effects of social media. I myself always have to be on social media. I have to be on social media all the time. I am very conscientious, not to say it doesn't affect me, because I have noticed it does alter one's attention span. That when I'm in rhythms of reading for long periods of time, and then I get into social media for long periods of time, I notice that it's harder to get back to, from the social media, it's much harder to get back to a place where you can focus for long periods of time. So I definitely see that. But the reason why I included this in our video, or my video, was the effects of social media are reminiscent of the narcissistic emphasis on individualism in this country. And so American individualism and the emphasis on individualism leads people to wanting to be unique in a world of non-uniqueness. And so that's where social media then comes around. And then how do they demonstrate their uniqueness? Often through very non-unique ways: clothing brands, money, false forms of morality, so virtue signaling, all these different things. And by doing that, they get the condolences of and the appreciation of their friends and family and those around them, making them feel better about themselves, highlighting their individualism and their own narcissism and their own veneration of themselves. Right? Ultimately, one of the gods of the American pantheon is ourselves. And this is ultimately the original sin, right? This is why Lucifer fell from heaven, is because he wanted to be God. He wanted to worship himself. This is what he tempts Eve with by eating from the tree of knowledge. And so that's why I made that one the first one. Not that there's a particular list of these gods afterwards, but I thought individualism has to be number one because that's tied to ultimately the original sin in and of itself, which all these other ones bleed from. So that leads to our children then. Growing up in an American landscape where social media is so dominant, that how many of these kids don't have good parents? And so that narcissism, that spoiling, that total emphasis on oneself is perpetuated. It's fostered in many young children, and we see these terrible kids because their parents, one, they have no discipline, because they have no boundaries, because they have no masculine principles, they have no masculine energy. Again, we talked about how masculinity sets the boundaries and holds boundaries, that femininity is all about blending things, which can be good in creative spaces, different things like that. But again, in an American context, it's not uncommon to find kids engrossed in social media, which then totally warps their worldview, their mentality, their values, all this different stuff. So who's raising the children? Who is raising the children? Too many of Americans just give their kids apps, tablets, iPads, and just let them go. And so then the world, the fallen world, raises your children. That's terrible. And I would say that's sadly the case for so many of us. Next one image that I used had to do with sports. Again, I chose America's team. This is all, and those who are just tuning in, these images are from a video that I created talking about American gods. And so if you wanted to see that video, you can just go to my Instagram page. I'll throw that link right here in the live chat. And it's one of the featured stories there. But America's team here, the Dallas Cowboys. Look at, again, just how people and all that energy that they focus on a game when the money is being siphoned right out of their pockets through taxes, the government. How many wars are we in? How many innocent people are we killing? How many opioid crises are people facing? How many things are really important? How many pedophiles? How many children are being abused? And the men, often the more masculine men of our country, and this is true for really most nations, are too focused on sports and games. Not that they can't be useful or entertaining, because they can. Obviously, I grew up as an athlete. I love watching sports. I love playing sports. But also, it's hard for me to watch any sport in 2020 when the contradictions of NFL players going full contact, meanwhile on the sideline, people have to wear masks. I can't agree with, I can't participate, I can't look at all that idiocy and the BLM stuff. So I don't even watch football. Like in 2020, it's hard for me to even watch it. But I get the appeal. And unfortunately, how many men are devoting too much energy to those issues, to those activities, as opposed to actually doing what's important to salvage meaning, family, relationships, just do things in the world. So moving on from there, here is a great image of the American Empire right now. The American Empire. This was an image I found of the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, South Korea. Seoul, South Korea. This is the U.S. Embassy there. We have the Pride flag, and then we have the American flag, and then we have Black Lives Matters. And Black Lives Matters, again, nobody here is against Black people or anyone with African heritage or higher amounts of melanin in their skin. We are against the communist, anti-nuclear family, anti-Christian, anti-male movement known as Black Lives Matter. And so, interestingly, when we're talking about American gods, how much is embodied right here within? If we could even grab, this image right here unifies the progressives in regards to their sexual identities of the LGBTQ, of the top, the pride flag. Then we have the American flag that unifies what all the people who still have, many boomers that still have a strong allegiance to what they perceive to be the righteous and the success of America, the military, support for the military-industrial complex, just an over-veneration of the United States without real criticisms of what's happening in you and I's name, right? This is why people hate Americans. And then underneath that, of course, we have a Marxist, communist, radical left movement, all in the name of America. And so, again, I think totally apropos of where we are as a country in the landscape of the American gods. That leads to then, okay, so let's go into a Protestant in 2020, and we see somebody who's supposed to be leading a congregation based on the Word of God, the Bible, of which theirs has 66 books, includes them talking about sexual degeneracy that's explicitly forbidden. They have a female minister that's expressly forbidden. They are wearing a Black Lives Matter mask for a pandemic that has a 0.03 mortality rate. And that Black Lives Matter mask symbolizes communism, the anti-nuclear family, anti-patriarchy, anti-forms of objective epistemology. That was another thing that I talked about in regard to the spirituality of the sort of Black Lives Matters, is that even their epistemology is rooted within relativism, because I talked about how mathematics and the laws of logic themselves disempower people of color, as opposed to, I guess now it's Asians included, so I guess whites and Asians disempower other people through the use of mathematics and more logical systems. So what do we have here? We have a total inversion. We have a total inversion of Christianity in the name of Christianity, in 2020. And I think this is not just emblematic of the Western world, but certainly emblematic of America right now. And that leads to this. What do we have? Oh, well, the major corporations like the Nikes and all these Fortune 500 companies that fuel the semiotics of people's value systems and how they consume their ethics, like a Calvin Klein. What does it give them? Well, it gives them a man dressed as a woman to promote body positivity and female dress. So we have an overweight Black man who identifies as a woman, and they embody beauty and they embody femininity. So we see a direct attack on aesthetics. Clearly, that isn't the higher forms of aesthetics. That's an inversion. And then it's supposed to embody femininity, and it's literally a biological man. So we see, again, the American gods, the American pantheon, be directly an inversion of Christianity. And that's what we're going to get into over and over and over again, as we're going to see. It's that, ironically, interestingly, it's almost as if there's a spiritual war here. It's almost as if there's a spiritual battle, and it all comes down to Christ or not Christ. I don't know. The next one is the Scientism that I want to talk about. And this is a scientist on his knees worshiping the atomic structure. Look at all those valence electrons zooming around their nucleus. This is, I think, again, emblematic of so many people in this country, and even the higher forms of the intelligentsia, right? A lot of my critiques so far have been aimed at the general population, but when we look at the intelligentsia, we look at more the academics of the world or the professionals of the world, as I talked about with the balkanization of epistemology and many people not knowing where to go, how to assess the world, what rubric, what epistemology to use, that many people's defaults is scientism. It is science as the ultimate authority of truth. And that's where we get CERN and all this type of stuff, which then has Shiva, the god of destruction, the destroyer within the Trimurti,
outside CERN and them trying to create new universes basically by smashing particles together. So this is just a worship of this world, right? A worship, scientism and the worship of science is a worship. Ultimately, this is what's so funny, and this is why. Well, I'll leave it for actually when I get to scientism. So I'll wait for those comments. But next one is the pharmaceutical industry tied to scientism and how another god within the American pantheon is not just Mammon, as we've talked about. Mammon is certainly one of them. But then the pharmaceutical industry is literally there to keep us sick so we can buy more prescriptions. And so the god, the pharmaceutical god of this country is a real god that people, obviously it's a smaller, lesser demon, if you will, of Satan. But we exist, and I'm not getting into arguments about healthcare system or advocating for like a Canadian system over American. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Not talking about the infrastructure of the healthcare system. I'm talking about the methodology of diagnosis and then prescribing medical prescriptions, pharmaceuticals, that as a practice, which is now true mostly around the world. Not all places, though, are going to practice medicine like the American context does, where the American doctor actually gets a cut if they prescribe more of a particular medication, a particular prescription. So that leaves us then with a bunch of people looking like this, just inundated with pills on pills on pills. And this is unfortunately common for so many Americans. And so, tied to scientism, tied to really an absence, a lack of connection back to nature. It's not surprising. It's not surprising you're gonna find more medication, more neuroses, more mental health problems with people that live in cities. Again, all these artificial environments. These are in the pharmaceuticals. Well, I'll get to that actually. I have a whole thing on it, but it's a false form of even health because it's not about wholeness and well-being. It's just about preventing the feedback loop of response from like a symptom. Like you're experiencing something, so we're going to stop you experiencing that. We're not going to get down to the root cause of what is actually causing that symbolic loop, right? But anyways, and that leads into today's thumbnail, and why I made it today's thumbnail is that we see it's all about the Benjamins, right? So we see Benjamin Franklin here wrapped around sort of a triangle, and he's peering between American money. And so I thought that was appropriate given the Freemason roots. I didn't put Freemasonry as a god of the American gods, but that would just be another example of Enlightenment project. I mean, Freemasonry itself is in opposition again to the traditional Christian God. So it's totally consistent with the message of this video is how all these things, as we look at them and analyze them more specifically, how they're directly in opposition to most of what we believe to be true when we really look at it. So, and then of course we have the Black Lives Matters fist over here with a dollar sign, because remember when Colin Kaepernick was going on and Nike was doing those commercials, and then you had the conservatives say, oh, I'm not going to buy Nikes, which I'm not going to buy Nikes for more reasons than just that. I mean, it's the hypocrisy that they talk about social justice and then use slave wage to make their shoes. Again, Google, Disney, the hypocrisy is just indicative of evil. So we see that with the Black Lives Matters and people essentially consuming the Black Lives Matter because the corporations push it so hard. People consume the products. They consume the identity. They consume what they perceive as their own virtue and their own morality. And that is another, because morality and ethics, those come from God. Those come from God, except in our new American pantheon. So that has taken us much further than I expected. That's been almost an hour for me to go through that. So now I want to specifically go through each one of these quote-unquote gods that I'm talking about and talk a little bit more about it. So the first one is individualism. What is individualism? Individualism is the right of the individual to freedom and self-realization, that the moral worth of the individual is emphasized in regards to the collective or the community. And so individualism as a concept, as a sort of philosophical school, really got going again in post-Enlightenment thought. So we see anarchism, existentialism, liberalism, right? This whole country, everybody was talking, I'm a classical liberal. Like, I don't know why any traditional Christian would actually consider the classical liberal label as somehow you are sophisticated or knowledgeable, because any of the post-Enlightenment ideas, they're negating our worldview, our paradigm, by secularism, by all these different things. But anarchism, existentialism, liberalism, libertarianism, these are all rooted in a larger philosophical school called individualism. And I want to highlight something that I learned from Father Alexander Schmemann in this book. This past Lent, we were doing an online course, my church, on this book, Great Lent by Alexander Schmemann. And in the back, I forget what page, but eventually he gets to talking about the difference between the specificity of person-to-person interaction versus the ambiguity of large general concepts in relationship to the person. So like, I love all people, or I love the world. Schmemann would talk about how you really can't love the world. The world isn't there to love you back. Love itself is a reciprocal feedback. So you can only love something that can love you back. You can love your dog. Your dog can love you back. You can love another person. A person can love you back. You can love God. God can love you back. But these are all person-to-person interactions. These aren't, and yes, I say this knowing that what I just said, animals don't have the same level of personhood as you and I do because they're not made in the image of God. Yes, I agree. But you get the point of what I'm trying to say. And so from a Christian paradigm, the way in which we engage with the world is always at a one-to-one level. And it makes so much sense once you begin to look at it that way. If you want to help the poor, don't just throw your money to an organization that's going to help the poor, because half the time that money never even gets there, right? That is you taking your personhood and you're contributing to a larger, as soon as it gets more generalistic, more ambiguous, there's more and more problems. Take whatever you would donate and actually go find a homeless person, look them in the eyes, and engage with them. It's way more beneficial. Find a homeless person that's close to you and engage with them. Help them out. That is the Christian thing to do. And so you can see even the phrasing of think globally, act locally. Well, I know think about thinking globally. That's a whole nother conversation. But certainly thinking locally in regards to how you can contribute to the world, I think, is very Christian. That we don't, and that's why, like, during this Christmas season, what families can you help? What, kids that aren't going to get Christmas presents. You don't have to donate to, if you watch OAN every night, it's talking about giving money to the poor Jews of Israel or the Chinese or whoever, or the people who need it in Africa, which I'm not saying those people don't need your help. They absolutely do. But also somebody literally in your town needs your help. And so it's way more efficacious with your efforts to be on a person-person interaction working in the world, as opposed to the concept of individualism in the individual, which is an atomized understanding. And the individual, within the concept of individualism, every individual is the same. Now, is that true? No. From a theological perspective, every person has personhood. They're a person, but they're so unique. That's why God, you want God to remember your name, that you actually are unique. Your nature is general. We all have human nature, but your person is specific and unique. Now, individualism isn't like that. It's that we're all just automatons. We're all equal. And I wanted to highlight this to Marshall Mcluhan. Some of you guys may have heard of Marshall Mcluhan. He's a very fascinating individual, actually. If you're not familiar, he was a lifelong Catholic, actually, and had these very interesting theories in regards to technology and the mediums of communication. And so he was often, I think he founded the first school of communications up at the University of Toronto or something like that. But he has a famous book called The Medium is the Message. The Medium is the Message. Again, his name is Marshall Mcluhan. So I'm not saying a G. I'll write it down here in the chat. Marshall Mcluhan. And if you guys don't know, I would recommend Googling him, or at least just looking him up. He's a very interesting figure. And like I said, he was considered one of the, so in the in the 50s and the early 60s, Marshall Mcluhan, we lived in such a different way in America, and that they would, the television shows would actually have high level intellectuals on to talk about really interesting controversial topics. Marshall Mcluhan was considered like one of the more complicated, difficult person to understand what they were talking about. And one of his big ideas, he has lots of interesting ideas, but one of them is how societies are shaped by the mediums in which they use to communicate. And so he had this concept in regards to hot and cold mediums. And so that the way in which you read a manuscript is different than the way in which you read a book that has a printing press. That a manuscript is hand done, and then you have images, you have all this stuff. So you look at a manuscript, but you don't look at a book, you read a book. That's a different verb. It's a different process. He talked about the difference between a hot medium like the radio, where you have a hot medium, meaning you have to really focus in your attention like the radio, to a colder medium like the television, where you kind of sit back. It's not as active, right? Reading is a hot medium. A hot medium meaning that you have to be active when you read. Same thing when you're listening to radio. You have to be a little bit more active when you're listening to a program. But television, video is a colder medium, and this is his framework, because it allows you to be more receptive. You don't have to be as actively engaged. And so he has these really interesting concepts, how he talks about how the printing press actually shapes the Industrial Revolution, and how the fact that the printing press establishes the idea that every letter, so example with the printing press, the letter A is the same for every print that it will print. The same letter A exists. So now you just have the number of letters, as opposed to the way communication worked before the printing press is every A was different because it was dependent upon the individual who wrote that A. There was such a unique personality to reading language then, because it was handwritten by somebody, and people handwrite things differently. But once we have the printing press, we have a sort of industrialized structure of something that is repeatable at scale. And it's the same thing over and over, the same letter. That concept he equates then to coming back to individualism. That the individual then is just like that letter A, right? That it's the same at scale, that we're all just individuals. We're all just interreplaceable. And so Marshall Mcluhan has a lot of interesting ideas. I do recommend looking into him. He can be difficult to read or understand, but if you want to just get exposed to some of his ideas, just look him up on YouTube and look up some of his interviews, like during the 50s and 60s, and you'll be like, whoa, that's interesting thought. I hadn't heard of that. So yeah, and again, he was a Catholic as well. One of the things that he talked about, controversial, this is going to be absent of today's conversation, but Marshall Mcluhan, even he, as a lifelong Catholic, he believed that electricity was the descent of the Holy Spirit, which could certainly be controversial, no doubt. But like I said, the guy had so many interesting ideas, and he was like a Joyce scholar. So I don't know. We've never talked about James Joyce or Finnegan's Wake or anything like that. A whole very interesting stuff there. But Marshall Mcluhan was actually a Joyce scholar. And for those of you who know, like Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses, like these are very difficult books to read. It's kind of a big deal in literature if you're like a Joyce scholar. But anyways, I digress. So in regards to this individualism, we see how personhood and individualism are really opposite ideas. And Mammon talked about this before. But it's not that we don't have a concept of the value of the single. And I wanted to highlight this because I think based on what I was talking about, or even based on the sort of printing press analogy, that somehow it may devalue, some people may perceive it as devaluing the single unit. But Christ leaves the 99 sheep for the one, right? So there is value in, to divorce it from the concept of individualism of the individual. There is value there, right? Christ incarnates as a person, as a single, as a individual, if you will. But the way in which we understand that concept and how far we take that is very different. Christ was an individual, but his salvation, his soteriology, his salvific work was for the collective, the ultimate collective, the entirety of human nature. A little bit different there. So yeah, that's basically all that I want to highlight there, and then move into how individualism and social media are such connected and an important phenomenon in regards to this American gods, that the first god is individualism. Because we worship ourselves, ultimately, because we aren't really educated or instructed not to in our society, that this leads to an ultimate form of narcissism. As I was talking about, I don't want to reiterate too much with that artwork I was showing with the guy plugging plugging the port into his vein to get the social media likes and all that stuff. That our country, in the libertarian emphasis on the individual within our political philosophy of this country resonates at such a degree. Again, people are not conscientious of this stuff that are affected by it, but it resonates at such a degree that people are yearning to stand out. They're yearning to become that celebrity, that all, again, just the way our society is orchestrated. And so social media is a great way to do that. So the whole stream I did on virtue signaling, we could funnel that whole conversation into virtue signaling being the social form in which you identify yourself as subservient to the new globalist structure of values and how you're a good team player, right? That is all funneled back to really an emphasis on individualism in the Western world, and how, as this emphasis on individualism, I want to show how virtuous I am. I want to show how good of a person I am. I want to do all these things for other people to see, right? Again, opposite of our theology. When we look at the publican and the Pharisee, the Pharisee, right, is doing things publicly to show how pious or righteous he is, where the other person, knowing they're not, doesn't want people to know. He doesn't want to do pious acts in front of other people because he himself feels ashamed for how unpious he is at other points. That humility is the correct Christian humility, right? But in this country, in the new globalist structure, which is true for much of the Western world, you want to display your virtue as much as you can, because that is social points. That is how you score points. That's how you get this score that you're trying to elevate regarding your individualism. You get that higher by the more virtue signaling you do. And so people can't help themselves because they're wrapped up in this paradigm and they don't even know it. They don't even know it. And it was a great example of this if you guys watched Jay Dyer's debate with the guy who believed in the Urantia book. I forget his name. I'm not familiar with the stream. I apologize. It was on RRTV. But the gentleman Jay was debating believed in the Urantia book, and he had all these weird ideas, multiple contradictions. And I don't want to berate him because it is difficult when you're not philosophically sophisticated to kind of handle paradigms and much of this stuff. But the way he was virtue signaling at the end, I loved how Jay highlighted it and brought it out, because that's exactly what they do. There's a passive aggressive way to virtue signaling, because the virtue signaling demonstrates your morality to the world, and because ultimately they don't really believe in God, there's no reason to not make it public. If you really believe in God and you're really doing good works, why would you need to make it public? It's between you and God, and that's the only person who's going to be judging you anyways. But if deep down you don't really believe in God, you really do have questions, then every virtuous thing you do, you want to be made public so other people can see it, so they can know who you really are. And that is the society we live in. And that, I think, is ultimately rooted in this problem of individualism, which is tied into the original sin of Lucifer. And it's just rampant in our society, and social media only exacerbates that. So that's the first god, individualism. The next one is consumerism. Consumerism is another god of this country. And consumerism is the acquisition of goods or services at ever increasing amounts. And so the concept of consumerism really got going again with the Industrial Revolution. And so, and this is going to be the key theme, over and over and over again with all these different topics, is that funny enough that so much of the American identity or the American pantheon is that I'm talking about all these different gods, these ultimate value structures that we give credence to, so many of them arise during the Industrial Revolution, during the Enlightenment, all of which we see are the beginning points of this progress of continually moving away from tradition, moving away from God. And what does it move towards? It moves towards degeneracy. It moves towards evil. It moves towards death every single time. And so consumerism, like I said, began with the Industrial Revolution, really began to explode in the 20th century with overproduction and all this stuff. And so you get critiques of the consumeristic, capitalistic tendencies of America with the counterculture in the 1960s. And one of the things that I thought was interesting sitting and thinking about this topic is that consumerism and buying cheap goods is rampant across this country, right? And I would say it got worse. It got worse when the manufacturing of this country left and went to China. Products become cheaper, they become worse, and therefore, when you purchase them, you're not contributing back to your own nation. One of the things about the 1950s and the 60s and the 40s, is that we were buying American products. Now, again, not promoting consumerism, but the products people would consume were such higher quality, they could keep care of them and they would last over time. You can't do that now. Most cars you buy are made to break down after 200,000 miles, so you have to buy a new one. So production isn't the same now as it used to be, and therefore we need to differentiate consumption isn't the same now as it used to be, where now we're always buying cheap goods all the time. And this whole global economy, right, the exportation of American labor to China, this is all obviously part of globalism. And it's just this continual rot, right? Everything seems to be getting worse. And I think that is no exception. So in opposition to all this consumerism, one of the things that I began to think about is the homestead movement. Many of you guys are interested. I know I'm interested. This is something that I want to save up money for, find somebody to love, plan on buying land, a house, living off the land as much as you can. But as that idea sort of is beginning to really permeate a lot of people's minds and becoming goals for them in the future, many of you guys watching now, I'm sure, that the homestead movement is really a movement that is recognizing the emptiness of consumerism, which is tied to the emptiness of really sort of city life. And there's a continual consumerism there because there's no regeneration. You can't grow anything. I mean, you can, obviously, if you're a creative green-thumbed individual, you can grow on your patio or your windowsill, but you get what I'm getting at here. And that the homestead movement is really people trying, and that's why it's tied to people rediscovering orthodoxy. It's tied to people rediscovering traditional Christianity or taking Christianity much more seriously, because it's getting back to what God created. It's getting back to nature. It's getting back to dealing with animals. It's getting back with family and bearing children and doing all these different things. And all this is really in rejection to consuming meaning. Right? Instead of consuming meaning by buying products, buying labels, buying logos, what we're seeing with the homestead movement, I think, is people not wanting to form identities and meaning based on consumption, but based on creation. Based on creation, which is much more consistent with our theology. So instead of consuming, we're wanting to create families. We're wanting to grow food. We're wanting to build homes. We're wanting to build relationships. This is creating. This is not consuming. And so the homestead movement, I think, is, interestingly enough, a natural oppositional force to the detritus and the detriments and the vacancy of meaning due to consumerism. And that's only going to be for individuals really searching for God that are going to discover that. Because if you're still a vapid individual who's looking for momentary experiences of bliss, you're still going to be wrapped up in consumerism. And that's why I think some people just can't understand why others want to do this whole homestead thing. They're like, but it's so much effort, but you got to do all this stuff. But what about, I want to be able to, go to Whole Foods, right down the road or this or that. And the convenience and the consumption, I think, are one of the big differences for the homestead movement. It's about labor and it's about creation. And these are central to Christian theology, as we will get with the next point with money and capitalism. But there's a few more points I wanted to say in regards to consumerism. So I just hammered the whole homestead thing. I thought that was interesting. I wanted to share. It's something that I kind of thought about reflecting on it. But as I said before, everything is for sale in this country. So because of consumerism, everything is for sale, including your ethics. Your ethics are for sale, and that's what's tied again to the corporatism of people literally purchasing their Nikes because they support BLM and Colin Kaepernick, or doing this. They support LGBTQ, and look at that. And so people consume their ethics just like they consume their spirituality and their religion when they say, "Oh, well, I'm not spiritual. I'm not really religious. I'm just spiritual. I kind of like Buddhist meditation, but I don't know. I believe in like a goddess of the earth. I like Gaia." And it's like what they're doing is they are trying to move through the buffet or the smorgasbord of the spiritual supermarket and just consume. And they can't help but consume. And what's the consuming based on is the individualism. That's why I began with the individualism, because the consumerism builds on top of the individualist presupposition. Because they already assume themselves to be these individuals, now I, as an individual, need to shape my individuality, and I do that by consuming instead of creating. Create your identity by how hard you work, by what you do, how you keep your body, what you know, how you treat people, right? This is creating your image. That's what we're called to do. We create our image by acting like Christ. But what this country does is consumes its image. It consumes its ethics. It consumes its ultimate values. It doesn't create them. It doesn't cultivate them. And that's why then the people are so vapid. They're empty. So, like I said, brands and logos become identity, right? The Louis Vuitton, like even in the hip hop world, the Louis Vuitton bag, the clothes you wear, the logos, the Supreme. I don't wear logos. This is something that I consciously do. Maybe you'll catch if it's like a dress sweater or something, maybe there'll be a little something on the breast there, but it's not going to be real noticeable because I refuse to wear logos because I don't want to be a billboard for corporations. That's why I'm interested in like nice dress clothes, colors, the way I don't want any logo on it. No logos. So I'm all about colors. That's just a particular way to not engage with the way in which so many people, our friends and our families, how they shape their own identity. They shape it by the products they buy. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy name brand products. So I want to differentiate this as well. Quality and chasing brand names are two different things. Sometimes you buy the brand name because you want the quality. You only want to buy something once that's going to last a longer period of time. So I think that there needs to be a separation there. Not every time you buy a brand name of something are you chasing the brand or the logo to form one's identity, but we see how this is the case. We see people driving. I know you guys have seen people on the highway with an Apple sticker on their back window, showing how the brand of Apple as sort of that nerdy globalist genius type, that's down with the progressive values, how that is who they are. That's what they're doing. They're taking the Apple logo, putting that on the back of their car where it does not need to be, to show, look, this is who I am. I'm what the Apple brand represents. Nothing is more empty than that. Nothing is more empty than that. And so ultimately, with everything that I just said regarding consumerism, people are consuming their paradigm. They're consuming their paradigm. They're not aware, and you can't blame them, because not everybody's going to be interested in the conversation you and I are having right now. But they're consumed, like they're, again, if we talk to Jay Dyer, he talks about ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics. Most people, their entire paradigm, they're consuming through media. They're consuming through the stars of Hollywood. They're consuming through the products they buy. They're not actually investigating what needs to be true, what is true, what do I believe, and how does that exist, and all these different things, which, again, not everybody's going to ask those questions, but because of the consumerism that's rampant in our culture, most people are consuming or purchasing their entire worldview, and that is what's sad. But the consumerism leads obviously into the next god of America, which is money and capitalism. Money and capitalism. And so Mammon is the god to many. The Bible talks about Mammon. I don't have that verse pulled up, so forgive me. But it talks about how those who worship, you can't worship both gods. You either worship God or you worship Mammon. Mammon is just another term for money. And within the American context, many people, and this is true for the whole world, obviously, but I'm trying to speak specifically to America, is that many people do worship Mammon. And when we look at Wall Street, when we look at the banking, global banking, when we look at the Federal Reserve, what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing real power in this world, and we're seeing an inversion of order, right? Usury itself. E. Michael Jones has talked about how the Germans, right, found labor through their conversion to Catholicism, and that one of the tenets of Christian theology is that you actually find freedom through work. You find freedom through labor. And so finding work that fulfills you actually sets you free, and that there's value in the work in of itself, not just the value that's exchanged for the work, not the money that you're compensated for the work you do, but the work that you do itself means something. And so we see then with the banking system, how with usury that's set up, again, wealth is generated from money itself. It's not based on labor. And again, E. Michael Jones, if you haven't, just read this book here, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. Maybe highlights some of that, but he's got some good stuff. If you want to look more into that, just look up his stuff. But usury is, again, man as God. Man is creating life from something which is dead. Money is dead. Money is sterile. But they're allowing money to replicate more money through usury, through interest rates, through all these tactics, which, historically speaking, were supposed to be in opposition to Christianity and Islam. Now we live in a world where that's obviously not the case. I don't know of any Christian nation that doesn't have interest rates, that's not totally infiltrated by the world banking system. And so that whole system of usury is really built on cheating, scamming, and stealing from people. That it's evil, right? I mean, Dante, didn't he say that what was it, is the ninth circle of hell is usurers and sodomites? So not that we need to take everything that Dante said as word, but usury is not part of our tradition. And we live in a world now where the entire economic structure, unless it goes back to a gold standard, which there's talks that China is doing that there's like an internal war there, but the whole system it's evil. It's evil. And so it's so funny then when we start to bring this back specifically to the American context, we see the debate, the low IQ dialectic between capitalism and socialism. Capitalism and socialism. I mean, we might as well call it, this is the PragerU discussion of economics. This is This is like the low IQ dichotomous discussion that you need one or the other. Already our economy is a hybrid of both, as I'm sure you guys know. But side note here, I find it so dumb because anybody who's played Monopoly knows that Monopoly ends the same way that socialism begins. So capitalism is just the long route to the centralization of power, because Monopoly is always the end game. I mean, the game shows that. It's in a limited context. So when we see the TPUSA framing and the PragerUs and all these Jewy neoconservatives frame the whole conversation as always capitalism versus socialism, it's a losing dialectic. There's not a whole lot there. And the reason they're doing that, the reason why TPUSA, and I don't know if you guys saw their recent conservative get-together where they had like girls dancing in skin-tight outfits and blowing tubes of money out to the crowd. I mean, nothing conservative or traditionally Christian about anything TPUSA does, because they're not. They support homosexuality. They support transgenderism. The reason why TPUSA and Charlie Kirk and PragerU always frame it as capitalism versus socialism is because capitalism is so rooted within and foundational to the American identity that by framing that dialectic, you're framing yourself as America versus all like evil forms of economy, right? Without addressing the fact that the capitalism that Charlie Kirk and the PragerUs are advocating for wants higher immigration, more women in the workforce. You know, it always leads to lower wages. They're not about capital in the sense of like the nuclear family. Like you can talk about capitalism in terms of how you acquire capital. It should the government should be focused on the betterment of the family. Of course, our government isn't focused on that. Our government hates the nuclear family. It's evil. Our government is evil, guys. They just did a $900 billion stimulus to give us $600. Why don't they just say you don't have to pay taxes this year? Right? What are people going to do with $600? And think about that. That's only a fraction of $900 billion. Where'd all the rest of that money go to? That's not a bailout. That's not a bailout. It's a further perpetuation of the acquisition of capital for the 1%. Our government is so evil. It's disgusting. But you already know that. So the whole TPUSA, capitalism versus socialism, it's a way to subconsciously, people aren't conscious of this, but the reason why they form that dichotomy is because as soon as they do, capitalism is pro-America, socialism is anti-America. And that's how they frame it. It's such low-level IQ. And unfortunately, people are getting into these political discussions. They don't have the background. They don't have the language. They don't have the concepts to point out all this ludicrous ideology and how stupid this stuff is. So unfortunately, they're scammed by it. Unfortunately, they're taken by it. So that's all I wanted to say about the money and capitalism god of America. So for those of you tuning in, please smash that like button. If you haven't, smash that like. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. The gods that we have gone over in regards to the American pantheon that I'm talking about this evening has been individualism, consumerism, money, and capitalism. And now we are diving into secularism. Secularism is the fourth god of the American pantheon that I want to talk to you guys about now. And so secularism is obviously the separation of church and state, Now I ask you guys, where is that concept found in the Bible? Where is secularism found in the Bible? And we don't, do we? So why do any Christians support secularism as like totally justified in and of itself? You can't. Secularism is it's a game that says as soon as you are okay with secularism, you have said that religion is subservient to the concept of secularism. That somehow God is present within the house of worship, but he's not present and he's divorced from the public sphere. Well, that concept, the divorcing of God from the public sphere, allows the social degeneracy that we now witness in our society. I mean, that's clearly obvious. That really doesn't need to be enumerated much further. And so within the secularist framework, all religions are subservient to secularism. That secularism and religion, they sound like, when you don't really think about it, oh, they're like equal ideas, right? No, secularism itself, as soon as you are enmeshed within that cultural worldview, religion is subservient to secularism. Secularism has ultimate authority, not religion. And so secularism has ultimate authority, not God. Maybe for your individual little thing over here, but not for our society. God is not part of the larger framework of our society. That is problematic. God is everywhere. And so we as Christians, I don't think any of us should be supporters of secularism. As we see, secularism has allowed our societies to fall quicker, right? We are now witnessing the collapse of the American empire. That could be a good thing, depending on how you're framing it. But we're only 300 years in, guys. Think how long the Byzantine Empire lasted. Think how long the Roman Empire lasted. Think how long the various Chinese empires lasted. Think how long the dynastic cycle of Egypt lasted. And we're like one little sliver of those histories here in America, and we couldn't even make it. We're falling apart right now. That's because of secularism. There's multiple reasons here. Much of it is post-Enlightenment thought, but we can see how secularism is a catalyst to much of this. It's fueling it. And so one of the interesting things that I think is one of the most enthusiastic groups about secularism is the Church of Satan. The Church of Satan loves the idea of the separation of church and state because of all those dumb Christians out there, right? And that they don't want those dumb Christians dictating what they do in their bedroom, right? Why do you think the Church of Satan is so supportive of the separation of church and state? Because it allows for the darkness to exist within our society, within the public sphere. It allows for the darkness to persist and perpetuate itself. Again, I understand the Church of Satan, Levian, Satanism. It's much more atheistic. It's not theist. I get it. I'm familiar with the schools of Satanism, but it's all the same thing if you ask me, because it's not venerating God and it all worships oneself. So you can split hairs between the Levian, they're more atheistic, versus the Sethian school, or they're theistic. I don't care. Okay, so within the secular framework, all religions are also then equal, right? If you live in a secular society, say it is a Christian America, right, of the 1950s, even though you're in a Christian America in the 1950s, by definition, that Christianity is equal to every other world religion. There is no validity to it more superior than Buddhism or paganism or Wicca or Islam, or they're all just in a category that's man-made, that's called religion. And then secularism is the larger house over that. So perennialism, the idea of perennialism, that all religions lead to the same truth, you can see that was also a sort of natural consequence of secularism itself. The assumption that, well, it really doesn't matter which religion you choose, they kind of take you to the same place. That, I think, presupposition is already present within secularism. And so religion is useful so long as it serves the secular state. And that is exactly the case. And this gives us new eyes for the present moment in the attack on traditional Christianity that is absolutely happening right now, is because traditional Christianity is not aiding the secular state anymore. Traditional Christianity is against globo homo. Traditional Christianity believes in a second coming. Traditional Christianity promotes nuclear family values. Traditional Christianity is not in favor of a globalist power structure or a one world religion. And so, unfortunately, for evil, right? I mean, it's not unfortunate, it's the way it is, but that's why I think we're seeing the specific directive attacks on Christianity in America, is because all the other religions, ultimately, and from my opinion, they're not ultimately true. We can point out their contradictions. So because they're not ultimately true, I don't think their hierarchies ultimately go back to the same hierarchy that I venerate, and therefore they're useful tools. And that's why the progressive left's okay with Islam, but you definitely can't be a traditional conservative white man that's a Christian. That's problematic. And so why is it that Christianity is being specifically attacked, other than within secularism? Religion, pragmatically, is only useful when it's working in favor of the secular state. And as soon as it's not, it needs to be destroyed, or it needs to be dealt with in one way or another. So when we see, as Jay Dyer has highlighted, the CIA and the FBI infiltration of ecclesiological structures through the various denominations of Christianity to make it more liberal, to promote progressive values, to promote Zionism, if you will. So lots of ramifications from secularism, but I'll move on. The next god of the American pantheon that I want to talk about is progress. Progress as a concept. And as I'm highlighting, progress from a Christian worldview is ultimately regress. And I'll highlight that a little bit further here. But progressivism is a political philosophy or a reform movement that focuses on issues stemming from modernization. And so progressivism got going in sort of the end of the 19th century, right? The Industrial Revolution's already happened. It's well on its way. We're at the end of the 19th century, moving into the 20th century, and we see progressive ideology begin to form at a philosophical, political level. And so it's interested in the environment, in pollution, and workers' rights, child labor. The progressive movement's what got women the vote. But all this type of stuff. And so naturally, progressivism in the contemporary period, moving along with those same things, is interested in the environment and global climate change and social justice, and then workers' rights and all this type of stuff. But progress is the moving away from God to the state being the sole source of authority. So as progressive ideas emerge, notice how all of them are moving away from tradition and filling the role of tradition or of God with the state. So highlights being man manipulating nature. So cloud seeding, Bill Gates wanting to shoot dust particles into the atmosphere, the manipulation of weather, all the different military programs we have. This is all done in the name of environmentalism, right? It's not about letting nature actually perform natural cycles. No, that would leave nature in the hands of God. Instead of allowing nature to be in the hands of God, what progressivism does is bring nature into the hands of man, because this is the nature of their theology. This is the essence of their theology, of the veneration of man himself as God, because it's tied to Luciferianism, Satanism, all that stuff. So in the name of environmentalism, we build massive cities in Dubai in the desert, right? In the name of environmentalism, we shoot dust particles and block out the sun in the atmosphere. In the name of, here's another one. In the name of caring about human life, we create viruses to kill people and then create vaccines to kill more people to lower human population. But we kill people in the name of caring about life. That is progressivism. So again, moving entirely in the opposite direction. God is life, right? Life is an uncreated energy of the Logos. So we may say, or you may have an opinion that, oh, well, the planet is kind of overpopulated. Even if that's the case, God dictates who is born, right? God dictates the nature of life. If God didn't want somebody to be born, they wouldn't be born. Despite how much fornication their parents try to have, God dictates life. And so this is one of the theological problems with abortion, with human depopulation, right? This stuff is absolutely evil. And then again, what I said leads straight to death. It leads straight to death. And instead of letting instead of letting God deal with nature and its natural cycles, man deals with it. And this then is the government filling that role, because now it's going to be the U.S. government. It's going to be the UN. It's going to be the EU. It's going to be China, whoever. And they're going to cause alterations in the environment or weather or all this stuff, right? How about man manipulating sex and gender? All in the name of sexual liberation, right? In the name of sexual liberation, liberating, right? Because the essence of individualism, which was the first God, is personal freedom and self-realization, right? The definition of individualism, when you look at it at a philosophical movement, is that they're interested in personal freedom and self-realization. Okay, personal freedom and self-realization. Though good in and of themselves, you could see how those could be turned and manipulated, where freedom becomes the dissolution of boundaries, maybe a society that has no boundaries anymore. And that self-realization is a narcissistic emphasis on oneself and their own desires, right? So given that individualism, man is now sexually liberated, right? He's free. That individual, he's free. The individual is finally sexually free. He's liberated. And that's why he can be a minor attracted individual. That's why he can cut off his testicles and his penis and transition. That's why he could chemically castrate his child if he had a son, because this is progress. This is science. This is us moving forward. You know, the idea of man creating, or God creating man and woman, that's so antiquated, right? God didn't create man and woman. What we're going to do is we're going to fill that role, again, displace God and fill that with the state. And so we see the American Psychological Association, we see the U.S. government, all of a sudden they're beginning to recognize infinite numbers of genders, 47 different numbers of genders, 70 some numbers of genders, all this different stuff, different pronouns. Why? Well, where is all this coming from? Well, it's clearly in opposition to God. It's in opposition to God, and so we move back towards death. Because as soon as all those sexually liberated practices, as I talked about, the homosexuality, the sodomy, the transgenderism, the castrating, the chemical castration, all this stuff, it's all sterility. It's sterile. There's no life as a product. And we just talked about how life is God. So, the same pattern over and over again. Progress equals regress from God. Progress equals a movement towards death. You're progressing towards death when you adopt a progressive framework. Another one being the man centralizing global power. Well, this is the advancement. This is political advancement. Duh. Right? We have to deal with like the COVID. We have to deal with viruses. We need a centralized political force. We need a centralized political institution. That's how we're going to deal with these things. The centralization of power, right? The early church was so weary of the centralization of power, or making man, quote unquote, God. So they had the synodal understanding. They wanted the Holy Spirit to lead the church by distributing power through the synodal structure. Catholicism went the other way with the papacy. And so I think we can generally see how too much power in a single hierarchy, like the papacy, like communism, like socialistic institutional governments, it always leads to degeneracy. It always leads to an inversion, because that's not how God would want it. Nature itself doesn't work that way, right? If we're going to look, even though nature is fallen, so we have to be careful doing natural theology, if we are going to glean truths from nature, we can see that it's harmonious in the way that it works together. It's not about single structures dominating other structures. That's really not how it works. So, yeah. Progress. Progress is regress. Progress is movement towards death. Progress is always man becoming God, and progress is always the displacement of God for the enfavorment of the state. And that is another God within the American pantheon. The next one is Scientism. Scientism is the promotion of science as the best or only objective means by which we should determine normative or epistemological values. Normative or epistemological values. And so the idea that science is the only way in which we can access truth is reminiscent of what I'm calling the cult of the white lab coat. The cult of the white lab coat, which includes medical doctors and scientists. Medical doctors and scientists. And how people give irrational authority to them. And the first reason why I think they do that is because they're too epistemologically impoverished to do otherwise. And so this is tied to what I was talking about previously with the balkanization of epistemology, right? The balkanization, meaning it's all breaking up, that we're not in the Renaissance anymore, where one person could, really learned individual could really grab a hold of all of the knowledge present, right? Really be a Renaissance individual, a Renaissance man, right? We can't do that anymore. There's too much knowledge to be able to grab all of it, right? We live in an information economy, if you will. I've heard that being said. So if we have way too much knowledge, what epistemology are we using as a rubric, as objective to understand the world? Nobody knows. Are you using a traditional Christian epistemology? Are you using a scientific epistemology? Are you using a sociological epistemology? What epistemology are you using? Are you using an Islamic epistemology? Are you using a communist Chinese epistemology? Everything's balkanized. Nobody knows which way to go, which leads to a degradation in the faith of God, right? Because people don't think that religion is then authoritative anymore. And so what do they move to? Well, it's science. Science, because it makes all these different goods. They can look at their cell phone. They can look at their computer. We're live streaming right now. They can look at their car. They can look at the world. And it seems like, well, the only thing that I see progress, right? We talked about how progress is really regress, but for that person, they're going to see progress within scientific advancement. Scientific advancement. And so you're going to hear phrases, and the people who are stuck within this paradigm, I think, iterate phrases like, don't you believe in science? Don't you believe in science? This happened to me, and I think I may have mentioned it in a stream before. I'm not positive. But a woman was upset with me because of a meme I posted about not wearing masks in a grocery store. And so she started talking about how she hopes I don't do that. Again, virtue signaling, all this stuff. And then I came back fairly sharply because she was insinuating that I was an inconsiderate, immoral individual who was very self-centered by the fact that I wouldn't wear a mask in the grocery store. So I came back fairly sharply, and then she was upset saying, oh, I thought you were a Christian or something. And how can you be a Christian when you don't even believe in science? This was one of her things. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? What does somebody being a Christian or the validity of a Christian identity have anything to do with belief in science? And when you really begin to investigate this stuff, it's that they don't understand what, like, they're so sort of programmed. They're so, they've adopted a paradigm to such a degree that they can't even see the ramifications of it. And so belief in science, what does that phrase even mean? How do you believe in science? Science is a methodology of investigation of physical reality. Therefore, science can be done and we can get different answers, and then we can look at the experimentation and figure out maybe why we got different answers. Her thing was that I haven't listened to all the scientists tell me about how effective masks are and how dangerous COVID-19 is. Turns out this person doesn't know much about science. And so when she started talking to me about science, I actually can speak a little bit of science to talk about science. And that ended the conversation right there, because there's a level of competency there. And so the belief in science is to this epistemological impoverishment of people, is that they don't know science. Science is esoteric. And so the white lab coat figure becomes the wizard, right? They become the wizard. Instead of a cloak, they wear a white lab coat. And they can do all these really interesting things. They can manipulate matter. They can figure out things about the future that I'm not going to know about. They can understand patterns that I don't know, right? They can do alchemy in a way, right? I think the American imagination has, because there's so much Western esotericism within the American mind, because a lot of the people who had sort of aberrant Christian theology weren't really accepted in parts of European society. So that's why they came to America. And by coming to America, we see, there's a whole book. I don't have it near me, but I have a whole book on Western esotericism and its prevalence within the history of early America, and then up to the present moment. So whether you're looking at Freemasonry, right? This is all Western esotericism. Most of the founding fathers were Masons, so they were wrapped up with Western esotericism. And it's so interesting then with those Western esoteric yearnings that I think it's kind of apropos to say that the white lab coat figure is the contemporary American version of the wizard, of a pagan wizard. And maybe you guys disagree, but let me know what you think there. I think there is a real connection there, that the white lab coat scientist or medical doctor in a way is sort of a pagan wizard to most people, and they don't have the conceptual apparatus to critique, to look at, to question what it is that they do. And so you get a Dr. Fauci, you get a Dr. Birx who come on during a pandemic, and they can't understand that a cloth or surgical mask has nothing to do with the filtration of air. They have no idea what the argument is for or against mRNA in a vaccine, how this is a novelty in regards to vaccinations. They don't know that. They don't know the typical immunological response of antibodies and antigens and how all that stuff works. They don't know. So science, whatever that is, which is just a methodology of trying to figure out the world, which does not invalidate God in any way, they don't know about it. And so they think science disproves God to some way, and that somehow science must be the only way in which we know things to be true. And sadly, I think many people fall into this. And so the scientist as the wizard, or this esoteric, I think leads then to the legitimacy of big pharma, which is tied to the scientism god of America. And that big pharma, tied to money and capitalism, tied to consumerism, tied to individualism, and certainly a product of secularism and the absence of meaning within our society in most people's lives now. Big pharma fills that void with all their medications and their prescriptions. And so which really is rooted within a meaning and a tradition problem in the society, that's dealt with through pharmaceuticals, which then gets people addicted to substances, addicted to this world, causes a whole host of other problems, because the way our pharmaceutical industry works is about addressing symptoms, and it negates symptoms. So you get a symptom, you get a pill to stop that symptom, but you haven't fixed the root problem of why those symptoms are emerging. It's not about health. It's not about getting you healthy. A really healthy person doesn't make money for the pharmaceutical industry. Our entire medical industry is based on making money. And so you can talk about prisons, private prisons. Why don't we talk about hospitals? Why don't we talk about the kickbacks that you get for COVID-19? Why don't we talk about that? That's a big, interesting conversation that nobody really wants to dive into. And big pharma then can steer so much of our society in it, and because of the wizard science connection there, at least in my opinion, potentially, maybe you guys disagree, I don't know, that big pharma then gains a legitimacy, and people think that they can take these magic pills, and these pills will just make them better. The reason I phrase them as magic, again, building upon my analogy of the wizard and the esoteric practice and the alchemical conjuration of pharmaceuticals, that instead of doing work, instead of becoming a more humbled and righteous person, instead of caring about your health and your body and working out, instead of focusing on your diet and eating better, instead of building real meaning in a relationship with God, all these things which take work, you can just have a pill and you can be happy and you don't have to deal with all that stuff. Oh, and by the way, you got to go to your 9 to 5 that you hate and work for those people, but we'll give you a pill and they'll help you get through that. That is not good. That is totally reminiscent of our society and the contemporary American gods. And so it's necessary for people to know that science then is bought and paid for. Science is not their, science is a methodology. People who know science is a methodology. People who don't know science or want to use science in a malicious way act like science is a school of epistemology in and of itself, and that it's totally valid despite whatever, contradicting evidence may emerge. And so science is bought and paid for, and because it can be bought and paid for, and the fact that people with money will fund laboratories to do research to get specific results, because it can do that, science and scientism becomes a mechanism, a feedback loop to reinvigorate the previous gods that we've talked about. So just like the progress, right, of sex and gender, well, we can fund a laboratory, as has happened with the American Psychological Association. We can fund them through our Rockefeller money, through whatever, and the Ford Foundation, and we can demand that they get results saying how good transgenderism is for children, and all this stuff, and that's exactly what they do. And so scientism, all these people not being able to understand science or anything about it, totally trust the lab coat as the magical wise wizard figure. They're told that, laboratory evidence has been done, and it shows that, actually gender and sex, they're not connected, and there's infinite numbers, and it's just performative, and it's actually really good for children, and if you want, we can go ahead and chemically castrate your son. This is all in the name of science, by the way. And so you see how scientism and the money behind it then redirects science as an enterprise to perpetuate itself, the globalism, the climate change, right? The social justice issues, the false economic analyses, the understanding that white men are the most dangerous, right? They're the biggest terror suspects in America now. How are we getting all these conclusions other than that money and the powers that be who already believe in the satanic globalist agenda are funneling and fueling these things? That's why they are the way they are. And so that's kind of the last thing I wanted to say about scientism. I have 3 more points and then I'll finally be done. Sorry, I know today was a bit of a long stream. We're already at 2 hours. Looks like we're all good. Oh, and we got some super chats here, so I'll definitely be getting to these guys. Don't worry about that. I'll definitely be getting to the super chats. I just kind of don't want to cut off my momentum, so I'm going to keep going here. And the next one, the next god of the American pantheon is sports and Hollywood. Sports and Hollywood. How is that a god in the American pantheon? Well, I'm tying it in my mind, and again, if you guys disagree, feel free to let me know, that sports and Hollywood feel the vacancy of meaning in most people's lives And so therefore they find real meaning and conflict and overcoming of strife in sports teams, celebrities, and Hollywood entertainment. So because of the monotony of their life, the monotonous stagnation of their lives leads them, and because there is no transcendent meaning, most people aren't really, strong in their faith in one way or another. There's nothing transcendent. Their life is monotonous. It's the same routine over and over. Nothing's real glamorous or interesting. That the way in which they take all that energy that's already in it, especially if you're a man, the energy to the intensity, men's intensity and their energy and their relationships to tribalism, and I don't mean that in like a negative way, like a racial context, but just like being part of a team made up of different racial people. There's a sort of tribalism there, a tribalism between the Cowboys and the Giants, right? And I'm a Giants fan or I'm a Cowboys fan. There's a sense of tribalism there, and that the tribes are getting ready to go to war against each other. This is natural male instincts. And instead of using those natural male instincts and funneling them to real important things like China buying up large swaths of real estate in this country, or the moral degradation of our country, or communist revolution, instead of men having a tribe that is true, maybe like Christianity or something like that, or your Orthodox, that's a sort of tribe, and then defending that tribe from the world is now you're in the game. It's not just Giants versus Cowboys. It's that my life has real meaning because there's a purpose. I'm here to protect something. I'm here to salvage something. I have a higher calling. People depend on me. That sports pacify men. And it's not that sports aren't interesting. It's not that sports don't allow men to achieve physical excellence, because it does. It does. It does do that stuff. It's that within the American context, I think sports are manipulated. Obviously, I don't think most of you guys would disagree with that. To influence, alter, and steer the people who watch the sports, change their values. So, like women referees in the NFL, who cares? Women referees in the NBA. It's like, why does somebody's opinion become more valid based on their genitalia? Doesn't make sense. And the same thing is with Hollywood entertainment, right? When people watch movies, just like the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon, right? All these women who have apparently dull sex lives potentially, but interested in reading about really kinky, weird stuff that again would be an opposite. How many of those women you think read 50 Shades of Grey, also voted for Joe Biden and believe in BLM and the leftist propaganda? Probably the majority of them, right? And so that whole book then perpetuates the same toxic masculinity and forms of the patriarchy that they say they're in opposition to, yada, yada, yada. But entertainment itself is a way to fulfill so our society gives people, there's real blind spots in our society. So there's voids in people's person, like there's something missing, just like the transcendence of God, more meaning, stronger community. Most people don't even have a good, strong physical community in three-dimensional space, not a community online. Those are great, but you got to be part of a real community. If somebody's going to come kill you, your friend over on the other side of the country that's 2 different time zones away ain't going to help you. You need people in your community right here, right where you're at. And so the entertainment is to fill the voids that people have due to living in contemporary American society. And so the whole use of sports in Hollywood in our country as a god, it seems like it's only to just like the Scientism, how it trying to steer all those people who believe in science unnecessarily without real ability to criticize it. Scientism steers them back upon all those different gods previously. Sports and Hollywood does exactly that as well. That sports and Hollywood expand the worship of the American gods through their films and the propaganda, right? The social justice issues, the critical race theory, the anti-Americanism, the anti-white male, all these things then are perpetuated in the films, in the entertainment, in the sports, in the ways in which people occupy their free time. And it just and then if they buy into that, it just brings them back full circle back into the corporatism and the consumerism and the money capitalism and the secularism and the individualism and the progressivism. It brings them all back to those. And so it's so effective that way. And so, yeah, that's kind of my section on sports in Hollywood, is that they're used to really direct, steer, and manipulate the watcher. And it's to direct, steer, and manipulate them back upon those gods that I've already mentioned, none of which are going to be Christ. None of which are going to be Christ. Now, the last one that I said is officially a god is the military-industrial complex. And the military is one thing that unifies American politics. So it doesn't matter if you're Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, or you're Donald Trump, or you're Mitch McConnell, or Lindsey Graham. All three very different politics. All three, big military guys. Now I know Trump wanted to bring people home. He hasn't yet. I understand he's up against the military-industrial complex. I understand that, and that's very difficult. But it doesn't seem like he's aware how he is also a tool and been manipulated by the Zionists, and how, in regards to the military-industrial complex, so much of what I've talked about regarding the secularism, the individualism, consumerism, the money, the power, the progressivism, the scientism, all these, when I'm talking about the gods, the American gods, they're really just American versions of the globalist gods, which are really just almost various versions of Satan, right? They're really just lower demons, if you will, of Satan. And so the military-industrial complex is totally tied to globalism, right? Zionism, I think, is tied to globalism because from an Orthodox perspective, the Antichrist is going to come from Israel, and therefore the globalism itself, I see it's going to eventually locate its capital in Jerusalem. I feel like that's based on the Bible. It seems like it has to be that way. So the U.S. military, it feels like, is basically the violent wing of the globalist infrastructure. And so you guys already know that I feel like the U.S. military is basically the military of Israel, that Israel doesn't have to do a whole lot, and then the American taxpayer pays for, and the American fighter dies for causes that have nothing to do with this country, right? And we then are just pawns. We are just paying for the military wing of globalism. And globalism leads back to Satan, as I said. And Satan, his goal is to lead humanity to death, to destroy your soul. And so if that's the goal of Satan, don't you think the military-industrial complex, with the amount of money that they make, and then the blood that they cause, the sacrifice and the horror and the trauma inflicted and the pain inflicted upon people, you don't think that's something that the evil one would revel in, would love? And then we look at the Cheneys of the world, the Lindsey Grahams of the world, the Mitch McConnells of the world. It's sick. It's sick. And that is definitely a god of this country. It's not a god of the Americans, though. By and large, the people that I actually know don't, and if they're conservative, and many people also progressive, left to center, different politics than myself, the majority of Americans I know don't want to be in war. They don't want to be there. And so it's like the military-industrial complex, unlike some of the other gods that I mentioned that are directly in relation to the, quote, Americans. The Americans are constantly in in conversation with those demons, the military-industrial complex isn't really done. It's done in the name of Americans, but very few Americans support any of it. And it just continues on, and we just continue to pay for basically the blood sacrifice of globalism and just feeding the evil beast of this world. You know, that our country is doing that. Other countries are doing it as well, but it's sick. And I think that is a god to some degree. It's at least a god of our politicians, because our politicians worship Mammon, and that's one way in which they're influenced. And so it's interesting then how the way our culture venerates military people to such a degree, not questioning why they are there, right? Oh, I got shot in Iraq in 2016, 2018. What are we doing in Iraq in 2018? That's not the question. It's thank you for serving our country. And it's like, at the same time, I got plenty of friends who are in the military or former military. You respect them. You appreciate them. But as a culture, don't we need to be a little bit more critical of why we are fighting in the first place? And so the over-veneration of the soldiers, I think, is exactly what's happening right now in COVID-19 with the healthcare workers being on the front line, right? Using the same rhetorical devices to influence people's enamoration for the soldiers. We're doing that with the healthcare workers. And then, so the healthcare workers then knowing when they're going into these places, knowing that, geez, maybe this is a bit overblown. Geez, why is the hospital doing wait, that person died. They didn't die of COVID. They died of this, but it's being written down as COVID. And then they go out of the hospital and everybody's saying, oh, thank you. Thank you. You're so brave. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. You're keeping us safe. And you see that there's an interesting phenomenon that occurs there, that when the people are so venerated, it's like they would feel ashamed to destroy everybody else's opinion of how great they are. And also they like the admiration. Who wouldn't? And so it's interesting that I think could be possibly manipulated, a conscious effort in the way that our society works to over-valorize certain aspects and jobs, like being a military soldier or being a healthcare professional. So then you don't actually come out and speak the truth about what's going on, right? Why? And because my problems with the military aren't with the individual soldiers. Clearly, they don't have an option. I mean, our U.S. military is a joke anyways. My gosh, we have trannies and homosexuals and women. I'm not in favor of any women in the military. Unless they're like for positions or roles that would be specific to a woman. You can imagine spies, stuff like that. That's one thing. But generally speaking, I don't support like female and transgender infantry. Like, that doesn't seem like it's going to go very well, especially against an all infantry of highly trained men who aren't going to put up with that. Seems like, again, we are just the globalist army. America is just the globalist military wing. And so it's interesting, I think, to see the rhetorical parallels between U.S. soldiers returning from wars we should never be in, and the overvalorization of them and their commitments, which are rightfully so, and then the overvalorization of healthcare workers in 2020 and related to COVID-19, both of which I think aid in the prevention of people wanting to be quote-unquote whistleblowers within those fields of work, because of the admiration they receive generally by society for what they're doing. Because I know people that work in the hospitals, and we are not in a pandemic that everybody wants you to think we're in. And it's unfortunate. It's because people, again, they consume their worldview so much that because of the media, because of everything, they can't help but not be in that place, because they don't have the critical thinking skills. They don't have the autonomy and the personhood to not be so influenced by those things, unfortunately. So, yeah, that basically covers in my military industrial complex. I said we are the military wing. It is evil, creates money and blood sacrifice for the beast. Yep. So that basically sums up that. The last one that I had that could potentially be a god for the, American god, if you will. Oh, by the way, guys, can you please smash that like while you're here if you haven't? If you have not, please, I would greatly appreciate it. But the last one is the Founding Fathers and the Constitution. And so I want to say, I feel like I was thinking about this and I was going to put it as one, but then after thinking a little bit, I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't, because you could go both ways to a degree with it. But my question is, do we over-venerate the Founding Fathers and the Constitution? Because the way that I see it is, the Founding Fathers, again, yes, they were Masons. Yes, some of them were deists. Yes, a lot of them, well, they're all men. They all had flaws, right? So we can all agree with that. But was England tyrannical? Yes. Would I have been with the American revolutionaries against the British? Yes. Are they honorable men for fighting for freedom? Yes. So it's like we need to be a little bit more nuanced, that we can agree of the America being a product of the Enlightenment, all the problems with that. Again, enumerated in this video: the individualism, the secularism, the consumerism, the scientism, the capitalism, the progressivism, all products of post-Enlightenment thought. We can all say that those are pernicious and negative, but we can also say that, just like Protestants, again, Protestantism, once you become a little bit more sophisticated with this stuff, you're like, geez, how can anybody read, know a lot about theology and be a Protestant? But at the same time, if I was in Europe and dealing with some of the stuff going on in the Catholic Church, would I have been one of those Protestants during the Reformation? Potentially. I have a bit of an adversarial personality myself. So not being exposed to orthodoxy, not having an opportunity to know what orthodoxy is, so you can understand the Reformation and also criticize its legitimacy or its coherency or its theology as being accurate whatsoever. And I think we can do the same with the Founding Fathers. So do we over-venerate the Founding Fathers? My first thoughts were yes, but then I thought, geez, but they were quality men. They were quality men. Yeah, some of them definitely weren't the Christians I would have wanted. But were they men that actually put their lives on the line for something they believed in? And they did. And that's more than a lot of us can say for ourselves. And so if we're lesser men to a degree, I mean, it's not that we can't ever be critical. We can always be critical of whoever. But we should also respect men who actually put their lives on the line and fight for what they fight for. So at the same time, do we over-venerate the Constitution? So like I said, America was an experiment. This was a post-Enlightenment experiment due to all these different ideas that were emerging that were unique in American or in European history. And so they were trying to then coalesce all these other forms of government with the executive and the judicial, with the House and the Senate, the legislative. They have all these different ways. They're trying to bring types of government together. I get it. I get what they did. Generally, I think the Constitution, I understand. I'm not in favor of the separation of church and state. So it's like, then I was thinking about the Constitution. Do we over-venerate the Constitution? The Constitution is a unique legal political document. It has some good stuff. The right to bear arms. I'm big in favor of the Second Amendment. But as Christians, I think we also have to be careful to not over-venerate the Constitution. The Constitution shouldn't trump the Bible as it does for some people. And therefore, in 2020, we shouldn't really be in promotion of anything that's secular. Not that we can't try to defend the Constitution. I know that there's going to be a constitutional crisis in regards to Trump and what's coming on and down the line right now. And we still need constitutional scholars to argue the case. I get that, but our faith, that's why I like what Luke's doing with America, or Orthodoxy First, is that our orthodoxy has to come first. Our Christianity has to come first. But yeah, our Constitution is better than other constitutions. I'm not a big favor of secular forms of government, and so those constitutions I'm already critical of. But there are good things, and so that's why I said, is it a god? Is it not a god? It's like for right now with the presidency, it's like how can you not expect Trump or Lynn Woods or Sidney Powell to not reference the Constitution to make the case for the legitimacy of the President Trump? You have to use the Constitution. So it's like, do we over appeal and venerate the Constitution? Maybe to a degree. I think yes, maybe to a degree we do. But at the same time, there's good things there. Do we over venerate and valorize the founding fathers? Yes, I think we do to a degree. But at the same time, they're also they were also chads for what they did. Yeah, I'm sure they had plenty of vices and stuff like that. So, I don't know. It's a thought. Maybe let me know what you guys think. Maybe you think that the founding fathers and Constitution is a sort of American God. Maybe you agree that not so much. But that basically concludes today's stream. Geez, that was 2 hours and 20 minutes of nonstop talking about our American gods. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And let me dive into some of these super chats, guys. Thank you so much for throwing in the super chats. Thank you, everybody. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or you'd like to show some appreciation, feel free to throw one in right now. If you have only $5 that you are looking for something to do with, go over to davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, and go to the register page and become a member at the website. Here is the link right here in the chat. And also, if you guys want, don't forget that the beginning of this video was all talking about a video that I made on my Instagram on American Gods. If you want to watch that story, just go to my Instagram page, and it's one of the featured stories there. So both those links are in the chat right now. First, super chat comes from Gen Z Philosophy through $1.99. And he said, how strictly do you follow fasting rules? Well, Gen Z, I will shoot it straight, as I always do with you. I was just chrismated into the Orthodox Church November 1st, 11/1/22. My priest told me not to fast until I could partake in communion. So I was not fasting previously. I am now part of the church. I told him that I was going to have struggles, and basically he said to incrementally get into the fasting habit of the sort of the Orthodox calendar, because obviously we do fast quite a bit. So I do not, as of right now, as of the second month of being Orthodox fully, I do not adhere to a strict fast. I am trying to give up things. I'm trying to participate, but I want to build up that muscle so then I can do the entire fast. As of right now, I'm not big into failure. So it's like, I don't like to do things that I know I'm going to fail at. I'd rather just slide into them, slowly build up to that. And so I'm sorry to disappoint anybody. I am not following the Orthodox fast super strictly right now. Just because this is my first fasting season, and I'm just trying to get a feel for it. But by Lent and Pascha, potentially I'll be on the full fast then. So I'll let you know. But my goal is to be holding the liturgical calendar fast, so I can talk about bodybuilding and how I go about still maintaining my body and building muscle during those times. So eventually I'll get there. I promise. Gen Z Philosophy. Oh, Neo Noir 94. Good ortho bro. Good brother. Says, huge supporter of what you do here, brother. God bless you, sir. Oh, thank you, brother. I appreciate you throwing in the £5. Thank you, and thank you for your support, man. I really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it, man. God bless. God bless you. God bless your family. Hope you have a Merry Christmas. And same to you, Gen Z Philosophy. Hope you guys have a Merry Christmas. Daniel E throws in $9.99. Daniel E, man, thank you, brother. He's always helping me out, always supporting the stream. Gosh, he even threw in another one. Daniel E threw in another one for $4.99. It says, Coomers and Zoomers, a.k.a. Coom Zoomers, reject logos, reject logos, embrace logos. DPH equals our guy. Daniel, thank you so much, my brother, for the basically for the $16. Thank you very, very much, man. I really appreciate your $9.99, your $4.99. I really appreciate you contributing, man. And I'm so glad that whatever I do, you find worthy to contribute to. And I do appreciate your comment here. Coomers and Zoomers, a.k.a. Coom Zoomers, reject logos, embrace logos. DPH equals our guy. So I'm proud to be your guys' guy. And I totally agree. You got to reject the logos of corporations and embrace the logos of God and God himself. So again, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate it, Daniel E. Thank you very much. Ray the Musician, another good ortho bro. Ray the Musician throws in $5. I can't watch the whole thing right now, so I'm just stopping by to give you some money. Keep at it, man. Well, dude, Ray the Musician, thank you very much, brother. Gosh, that means so much to me that you'd even take your time to stop in to throw in a super chat, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, guys. Daniel E, Neo Noir, Gen Z, thank you, guys. I really, really appreciate it. And Andrew Pro, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering your last name. I don't know if it's Prof or Prow or Pro. I'm sorry. He threw in $5. Again, apologize, brother, for your last name. Andrew says, amazing stream, David. You covered so much hypocrisy in America and very plainly explained the complicated false dialects in politics. Will be sharing. Oh, thank you, brother. Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate those kind words. Again, Andrew threw in $5 and said, amazing stream, David. You covered so much hypocrisy in America and very plainly explained the complicated false dialectics in politics. Will be sharing. Thank you very much, brother. And please do share, guys. If you guys enjoyed anything that I said tonight or some of the other videos, and also when you're watching my streams, timestamp. If you think something is good, please timestamp it so then I can create clips. If a lot of people timestamp the same thing, that okay, well, I should probably make a clip of this. So I'd appreciate that. But thank you very much, Andrew. I'm really appreciative that you find what I'm doing important. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. And please do share with your friends, man. Thank you very much for your $5. Liam Converse threw in $5. He said, I think you're right, but I would say it's more accurate to say the, quote, white lab coat archetype is the priest of scientism. Is the priest of scientism. Well, yeah, it is the priest of scientism, Liam. So I agree with you that, but my point, scientism and paganism aren't the same thing. So the priest of scientism, what would be the priest of paganism? That's the point of the analogical connection between the white lab coat and the cloak of the wizard. That the white lab coat, the scientist, as the priest of scientism, as I agree with you, brother, I would say that he is the priest of scientism. Within a pagan context, that is the wizard. And my point in using that analogy is that for most Americans, I think, unfortunately, science itself is sort of esoteric, and they don't have the cognitive or conceptual skills to know science, to look at science objectively, to criticize science, to criticize doctors or other people that engage in science. And so that's why I was making that analogy. But I do agree with you, yeah, I don't think we're in a disagreement. Thank you very much, brother, for the $5. But I don't think you and I are in disagreement. I think we're on the same page, and I should have said the priest of scientism. So forgive me for not using that rhetoric. I think again you're making a really good point there. So I apologize, Liam, but again I agree with you, brother. Thank you. Beloved threw in $5 and said, I missed your point on Jesus in opposition or not to the individual God. Could you expand on it briefly? Missed your point on Jesus in opposition or not to the individual God. Would you explain? Yeah, so beloved, from an Orthodox perspective, it begins with what's called our Ordo Theologiae, which just is a fancy word of saying your order of theology. And so for us, we begin with what's called personhood, then operations, and then essence. We don't need to get into explain that any further, but the point of starting with person is that we engage with a God that has three persons and one essence. And so the way in which you and I engage with God is through our personhood and his personhood. And God, wanting to experience love is this ultimate value, has to have another person to experience love. So we can look at this in a multitude of ways, even within the Trinity itself. If I only exist and I say I love something, I can only love myself. So it's like, I love me. But if there's only another person, there's only one other person, then I love them, they love me. But if there's a third, then there's an other. And love requires another person. You can't love a thing. And so when I was talking about the individualism and the person, from a theological perspective within Orthodoxy, you can't love ambiguity. You can't love the world. You can't love humanity. You can't love these ambiguous concepts. Love is a phenomenon that has to be reciprocated, and can only be reciprocated by other things that have personhood, like God, like another person. And so when we engage with the world, we should engage, if we want to engage with love, for example, we need to love individual people, because that's the only way love can be transferred, transmitted, and experienced. So my point when talking about the individual in Jesus is that Jesus, as the Logos, the creator of the entire creation, the collective, also became an individual, a person. But he's collapsing that dialectic between the two. The individualism, as I was talking about, is very atomized, right? Every individual is equal to every other individual. It's like a factory of goods, right? Just multiple goods, and they're all just individuals, just the human individual. It's just a thing. It's just an ambiguous concept. It's a category. But you and I aren't just individuals. We're persons, and we have unique personalities. We have unique attributes. We're unique. Christian theology holds that. So personhood within the Christian theological concept is almost opposite of individualism, or the individual, even though we use those words when we're speaking. Like, you can say individual and not mean the philosophical concept of individualism. And so it gets a little tricky there. But Jesus is in opposition to individualism, right? But what I was talking about is that there's still value in regards to the person or the individual. And I'm talking about the story of the shepherd leaving the 99 for the one, of which we say Christ does for us. And so Christ does care about the single, about the individual, about the person, each one of us. But we are unique. And that's why, again, we also want God to remember our names. So in Orthodoxy, we always say memory eternal, because we want our memory to be eternal in the mind of God, so we always exist. Because if God doesn't remember you, how can you exist? And that is ultimate non-existence. So I hope I'm answering your question, but Jesus is in favor of person. And I was just trying to highlight in that discussion the differences between individualism and the theology of personhood. And that personhood is essential. All our interactions are one-to-one. And then the point that I was even highlighting with the Trinity, I apologize if that confused you, was that love within the Christian concept also, it's Trinitarian. And so I say you're in a relationship with somebody, I can only love another person, right? We've already established that. So I love them, they love me. But within the Christian context, there has to be a third person, an other, and of course that's always God. And so now there's a Trinitarian dimension to our love. And then we always talk about how triangles are the strongest shape in nature, right? So now our love, our relationship is Trinitarian. It's a triangle. It's between you, me, and God. And that is then reflective of God, Father, and Spirit, right? So that we see that the way to love and experience then is in a sort of Trinitarian structure. That's what I was trying to highlight with that. So I hope that answered. Thank you very much, B-Love, for the $5. Thank you very much for watching this treatment. Thank you for joining us. Joseph Galagos throws in $5 and says, outstanding stream. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, brother. Thank you so much for oh my gosh, Dr. Mo. Thank you so much, Joseph, for throwing in $5, brother. I really appreciate that. And I'm so glad that you enjoyed the stream. Dr. Mo throws in $2 and said he's my number one fan. Oh my gosh. I love that you chose to be a pair. Dude, thank you so much, Dr. Mo. Guys, if you can, go subscribe over to Dr. Mo's channel right now. He is the most frequent guest on Church of the Eternal Logos. Good friend, good Christian brother. Man, I hope all is well, my man. I hope you're doing well. Thank you, Dr. Mo, for the $10. Thank you for being my number one fan. I greatly appreciate that. And then he says, what is with these stickers? Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Mo. Again, brother, Merry Christmas. I hope you're doing well in the LA area. I know things are difficult right now, but if you ever make it back to Illinois to see your parents, dude, let me know. We'll have to meet up. Kudamundra Bear said, man, I love this channel, David. Well, thank you, brother. I'm glad you do. Please subscribe and tell your friends. Jared Primus says, he just said, well, dude. Well, Kuda Mundra Bear said, if Hitler wore a white lab coat, would we approve of him today? Probably. Yeah, probably. Nathan Martin just threw in, he just threw in 549 and said, thank you for the great content. Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you very much, brother. I'm glad that you like it. Thank you for checking it out, man. Thank you for coming over here. Again, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your wife, check out Church of the Eternal Logos. No, I'm kidding. But do share it. If you find it interesting, always appreciate new subs. And if you so happen to be interested, guys, go to davidpatrickcarey.com and sign up for a website membership. I got tons of exclusive content. Well, when I say tons, I have tons of videos, but I have about, I think 7 educational videos and about 10 workout videos. But if that's something you'd be interested, if you just want to donate $5 a month, become a website member. But I digress. Do check out the website, though. Oh, Dr. Mo said, God bless, brother. All is good. God is in control. That is so true. God is in control. And that's good to hear that you're doing well, brother. Things are crazy. And so, yeah, thank you for the $10, Dr. Mo. I hope you're continuing to do well. Hope you have a great Christmas. I imagine you'll be spending it with some friends, or hopefully your parents maybe or family can come see you. But really, guys, that is the end of today's stream. I don't have much. Looks like that's all the questions, all the super chats. Looking to see if there's anything else. Oh, Annie said, today your outfit is looking snappy today, sir. Well, thank you, Annie. I appreciate that. I'm going all black. I'm a little murdered out. And then I got my vest that's green and black with a green tie. It's a little something. I usually like color. Today I felt a little black. So thank you, Annie. I appreciate that. So anyways, that seems to be the end of all the questions in the super chat. So I'm going to get out of here, guys. Hope everyone had a great Monday. Again, Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you so much to everyone who supported, who threw in some super chats, who signed up over at the website. Again, I want to give a special shout out to Gen Z Philosophy, Neo Noir 94. Thank you, brother. Daniel E. Thank you very much, brother. Rated Musician, Andrew Prowl, Liam Converse, thank you guys so much. Love, thank you very much. Joseph Galagos, Dr. Mo, of course, and Nathan Martin, thank you guys so much for the support. I really, really appreciate it. Again, God bless everyone. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a wonderful evening. And my goal is to be back Wednesday, potentially with my stream on Sarge. And I'm thinking I'd like to do maybe a Christmas Eve stream where we read the Nativity out of Matthew and Luke and read some footnotes and just kind of talk. So may do that Thursday. So potentially you'll be seeing me Wednesday and Thursday. And if I don't do the stream on my dog and putting down Sarge Wednesday, I'll probably do it Saturday. But either way, you're going to see me either Wednesday or Thursday or both. So thank you guys. Marcos Ramos says, come to SoCal to my Antiochian church. We'll pilgrimage to Father Josiah's parish. Fun to speak with him always and get his blessing, of course. Oh, dude, I would love to go to Father Josiah Trenum's parish. That would be so much fun. So much fun. Jimmy said, black is my 24/7 mood. Yeah. Hey, Jimmy, thanks, brother. I appreciate your support, man. Appreciate you coming to the streams. Appreciate your activity in the chat. Appreciate just your support, man. Thank you, Jimmy. Have a good one, brother. God bless you and your family, and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Annie. Merry Christmas, Mama Llama. Marco Ramos, I am totally down, dude. I am down to go see Josiah Trenum. Love Father Trenum. And God bless you and your family. Merry Christmas to you. Andrew Powell. Oh, it's pronounced Pro. Oh, my last name is pronounced Pro. Thanks again, David. Andrew Pro. Oh, okay. Andrew Pro. Thank you, brother. I appreciate your support, man. Thank you, Andrew. Gerald Primus, Mama Llama, Kuda Mundra Bear. Have you guys a wonderful evening. Again, God bless. Thank you for all the love and support. And I will see you guys Wednesday or Thursday or both.